Next up, we'll have Ashok, and he's going to talk through the cybersecurity strategy collaboration session.
Yep. So the session that we had was developing mobile cybersecurity strategies, and the way we defined it was across the ecosystem of accessing applications and data. So you've got the user, you've got the device, the network, applications, backend, data and storage, and anything else, like a catch-all bucket. So, that's how we defined it. And we tried to figure out the challenges, the constraints, and what could be possible solutions, right, across this ecosystem. One thing I have to say about the participation was it was very, very good. It was across a range of expertise and industries came along, and we also had a couple of people, one from DHS and also from USMC, so that offered a lot of perspective as we were going through some of these challenges and constraints as to what some of these folks were really facing, on the ground. So we tried to have 2 or 3 different use cases. We got through one and rushed through the second one. The first one was around enterprise integration. Seems to be a current reality. We have this shiny new object, a tablet or a smartphone that we carry around now, and everybody wants access to it. Everybody wants to use it. That's going to be the holy grail, so to speak. But the current reality seems to be agencies have made investments, security investments, right, following 853, whatever FIPS, whatever the standards might be, and spent a lot of money trying to fortify their defenses, if you will, in the back end, within the enterprise. So how does this shiny new object kind of come in, yet play in that ecosystem? How will it play in the enterprise environment? That's the challenge we were trying to tackle at the first level. So when we were going through along this piece, we found that there were a few things that came across very clear. The first thing was, regardless of what it was, the use cases were going to drive the decisions, how these devices are going to be used, who's going to be using it, what kind of data are you going to be able to put there, what kind of applications are you going to access, etc. Some of these things I think people already know. Few things that came across here was, it's going to be a process. This process management is going to be very, very important, be it compliance, standards definition, whatever it might be. It's going to be very, very process intensive. We need to try to figure out how that process can be managed better. A couple of other things, policy driven. This is going to be very, very policy driven in the sense like any applications or any data that comes on the device has to be dictated by policy, even up to the user level, right? And then you have access management, as you see in the user case, which is very, very important. And so we talked a little bit about authorization and authentication, what might be there, and data security. Not necessarily from securing the device, but securing the data itself. A couple of topics that came up was not only about streaming data down, based on any access that you might have. The challenge there for us was, what about priorities based on network bandwidth? There's only so much available. How do you manage that? That's something that we talked about as well. And then there was, I can't even understand my own handwriting sometimes. The other was risk management. Any kind of access that you would have from the data or the application side of the device is going to be managed, based on a risk management framework, which I think a lot of agencies are starting to adopt. There's been, variations to that you might see. So that's one thing that we went across as we talked through. This is not the complete map. This was as it was developed. We were trying to take pictures. Tools were really helpful there, but there was a few other things that we went through in this particular case. Then what we did was we talked about the BYOD scenario, bring your own device. How does it apply to agencies? There was a few things that went back and forth. BYOD is applicable, it was not applicable. Is it internal app, external apps? There was a lot of interesting discussions that were going on. What was very clear from talking about these two use cases was that they kind of go hand in hand. Whether you have a new usage scenario that this new mobile paradigm might bring forth, you still have to integrate or look back to practices that you've already established, defense in depth, right? PKI, some of these familiar topics kept coming up, trying to figure out how we could use the same thing to extend it into the mobile environment. That's how much. Did I miss anything? I want to talk, see, look at Jim and Leroy and others who are in the
Well, you left
session.
out our best solution for BYOD, because understand when you have a spillage, we're going to crush your first.
Oh, yes, that was the best solution that came out of it, just crushed advice.
So I have a question on the BYOD side. So based off of the discussions that happened today, would the group make a recommendation to maybe not go after BYOD at this point in time? Is the industry and the policy mature enough to actually adopt BYOD, or is it something that should be maybe wait a little bit longer?
If you see a security person with a hammer, you might be concerned about the safety of your personal device.
So one thing that came out of the session was, again, there's still a lot of education, still a lot of details that needs to be uncovered as to what this BYOD paradigm is all about, right? And also where it can be used. That's why I was talking about how it can go back to the original conversation, security, right? What is the data, what is the apps that we need to secure? Can it really be brought onto a device that a user brings, into the enterprise? So I think it is still in a maturing stage.
And I think the other part that we brought out is that most government policy has this infamous quote of limited personal use. And the question now is, how much does a mobile phone push that personal enablement to a new place, even if you didn't do BYOD? That the boundary seems to be getting pushed much further than was being done on GFE desktops.
So in the government space, is anyone over at DHS looking at that from a legal standpoint on what that actually means?
BYOD?
Well, no, the clause that you just brought up about limited personal use. That's an interesting
Yes,
phrase.
that's why we're more going to. So the other thing that we did have out of it is that for those people that are not aware, there is a whole bunch of material that has been written for the federal CIO called Digital Governance in the 21st Century, which contains a whole bunch of information about what the government's opinion is on mobile devices, including the BYOD and containment and several other things. So there is actually a lot of government guidance that has come out this year.
Okay.
That we would strongly recommend that people be, on the vendor side, be aware of it, because eventually the government will be aware of what it's doing.
So, do you know if there's any statistics on how many quote-unquote spills there are on smartphones?
I know how many spills there are in general for incident response. I have nothing that says they're going to get any better with personal phones or with smartphones, because the applications are not under the same level of control.
And the BYOD ultimately needs to be, your own device is just another aspect to the context that we're talking about. Sure. Right. So 98% of the people, 90% of the time, are going to be accessing things that, fine, do it on your iPad. It's that 2% and the 2%, which whatever this uber, super smart risk engine that's looking at all the data going back and forth needs to say, timeout, fine, you are you, but you need to be in some other place with some other thing. Sure.
So I think that's an interesting point. That was one of the themes when I was sitting into your talk was we need to really look at how we look at, we need to really rethink the way that we deploy mobility, and that it's not the same as deploying a Windows box or the way we've done the past 20, 30 years. That there's a new model we need to think about. Certainly security is one of them, but now BYOD, not just the security aspects that looks into, well, are we building apps for the personal devices? What's the tech support look like? How many device types are going to support? So I think BYOD is far from solved, and I think it's going to be well, my personal opinion, it's a long way out before it's reality. And the securities piece is just certainly one important aspect, but it's just one aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be definitely a good takeaway for tomorrow from the government side is let's get them thinking in terms of mobile IT and let them recognize that it's a risk management-based approach. There's a lot of new
Well, it's like, the problem I always have, like when we get the conversations about applications, is that when we talk about applications, we're thinking about a known good person doing a known good piece of work.
Sure.
And I've just watched too many movies that I'm thinking the other way, right? Like if I think about an application as really just a window to a protocol and information, if I understand that protocol, then I don't need the application. I just need a way to communicate with such and such port over such and such protocol.
Right.
So that's where the other context, the other sort of challenge response context needs to come into play.
Totally agree, yeah. And then thinking about the operational gain versus the risk and making that decision, you know, every time it needs to be made almost that continuous certification
Well,
versus.
that's why you get into that, like, that 98% versus 2%.
Right.
90% of the time you make it very simple, so there's high adoption, and at 2%, you know, it's gonna be a pain in the ass because it needs to be a pain in the ass.
I think one of the interesting things that came up, we didn't talk about it too much, was that what kind of applications would people want to see? You know, there was a conversation around, you know, PIM and email, right? Is that all we are going to use these devices for, or there are mission critical applications that people want, you know, on a device? So that's where the compliance aspect, the process management, those things start to overlap.
Sure.
In there, and some of the other topics might also have a lot of relevance.
Awesome. Any parting questions for Ashok? Okay, no, group's on.